So you're going to be on, I've seen you on so many platforms. Media platforms are going to have conversations with you, especially since you're running for governor. What I'm trying to do here is, as best we can, get to know you, like who you are. So this is a softball. What do you have for breakfast in the morning?
Well, I start with organic brown rice farina. And I put organic cacao in it.
Can you what's cacao?
Organic turmeric.
Okay.
And organic maca. And I have pecans and or walnuts with it.
Okay.
And that is my rocket fuel.
So are you vegan?
Oh, yes. I've been vegan since...
You're right. She was right.
You're right. I've been vegan since 1995.
Okay.
And as a result of being vegan, and probably because I have a lot of other energy, I seem to have an unlimited amount of energy.
So,
I mean, I'm having trouble sitting in this chair right now because I'm like.
But a lot of it's you think a lot of it's related to diet? Because I was going to ask you.
Some of it is diet. I mean, look, I had Crohn's when I was a kid. It almost killed me, and I.
Oh my God!
Yeah, half of my. Well, if you want to know the details.
No. I think it's no. I say this because
my
family deals with colitis.
Well, here
Crohn's, I can.
Well, let me just
identify.
share this with you.
This is a different podcast now, but let's go there.
Well, I had Crohn's, and it was very debilitating when I was 21 years old. In September of 1968, I had half of my colon and half of my intestines removed.
Oh my God!
And subsequently had half a kidney removed as a result of this whole Crohn's disease. And so I struggled through a good part of my life with a lot of pain, and anyone who's had colitis or Crohn's understands what that means. Until 1995 in January, where I met someone who asked me if I had ever tried a vegan diet. So I tried it because I figured, why not? I was desperate to try to get rid of the pain that I was experiencing every day. Pain was normal for me. And so I tried a vegan diet, and it was just like a week later, I started to notice that the pain subsided and some of the symptoms of Crohn's began to recede. And then it was suggested to me that I ought to try Chinese herbal medicine. So I went to a Chinese herbalist who also happened to be a medical doctor from China.
Yeah.
And she, checked my pulse, looked at my tongue, asked me a few questions, and then went to her apothecary with all these herbs, pulled some herbs down, told me boil these up, put 12 cups of water in, boil them down to 6, take a half a cup a day for X number of days. And I'll tell you, it was miraculous. I used this Chinese herbal medicine together with a vegan diet, and my Crohn's was cured. I got rid of 5 out of 6 medications that I was taking that people said, I'd have to take for life, that I was told, look, it could come back, and, you could have to have more surgery with the implications of that. And today, I'm in the best health I've ever been in.
That's awesome.
I'm strong as an ox. I can, I'm able to leap tall buildings at a single bound. And I have a great deal of clarity.
Yeah.
Of physical strength, and the best health I've ever been in.
So you, even at an early age, we're not talking about socioeconomic, physically, I didn't know that about you. So thank you for sharing that, sincerely. You've been fighting. Your upbringing wasn't the easiest, from what I've read. Yeah. And you presented at a church I go to at University of Circle United Methodist Church, and you talked about that in one of the books you read or wrote, and you talked about growing up. What was it like growing up in Cleveland? What was your Cleveland experience like?
It was magical, and it was amazing, and it was also terrifying, and it was like
How is it all? I mean, how is it all those things for you?
Well, it was magical because my mother taught me how to read by the time I was 3 years old, and so I was, by the time I was 7, I was reading books that most kids in college were being introduced to, and so I was exposed to a world of adventure. It was extraordinary, and books were my refuge. They were the my platform to the stars. And
You have like a favorite you remember?
I read everything. I read everything I get my hands on. I'd go to a local library and I had to get permission from a teacher to get books that were outside my age group. But I'd read about explorers, adventures, space stories, ghost stories, sports. Anything I could get my hands on as a child, I read and read and read and read. And I just found, and to this day, find such a joy in reading. And the fact that my mother gave me that advantage from an early age changed my life.
Why do you think that was so important to her? Did she ever vocalize? I mean, I think we know generically why parents
I think,
do that.
I mean, she loved her Irish heritage, so she read to me from the Irish and Scottish poets. She sang Irish lullabies to me. She imbued in me a love of literature. And to this day, one of my passions is English Romantic poetry, because it has this sense of perfectibility, of the power of the human soul.
Yeah.
Wordsworth Intimations, Ode on Intimations of Immortality, the idea of a timelessness. There's and the deeper meaning of love, So I got that from my mom, and so that was the part of the adventure of life in growing up. The terrifying part was, moving from one tenement district to another, often in areas where the music of the night included gunshots.
Yeah.
Where there was always a hustle going on in the streets.
So you saw that, you lived that.
And the pressures inside a home. We had a big family and illness and not a lot of money. And, though my dad worked, there was never enough money. And the pressures that brings inside a household, inside a family, chaos, social disorganization. Yeah, I mean, I not just myself, but my brothers and sisters lived that too. But I was always fortunate. I had whether it was, teachers or coaches or they're always. Anytime it seemed like I was going to fall through the cracks,
someone was there.
Someone was there. I mean, my life has been so blessed because, and I realize how important it is for children to have not just early childhood education, but to have people who will be there for them. Sometimes it's relatives, sometimes the teacher. So I mean, I've in moments when it seemed like all was lost, there was always somebody there to say, "Come on, you're going to be okay." Hang in there.
Politically now, and not jumping, but politically, this is kind of a larger question. You talk about like connectivity. You've been there. You've seen the good and the bad. You grew up in a situation where, when you get on a platform and you talk about social justice or you talk about economic justice, you have a reference point.
Well, my reference point is, we grew up, and I grew up in an inner city family, the oldest of 7. My parents never owned a home, and because we had trouble finding rent, as the family grew, this back in the 50s, there'd be ads in the newspapers which would say, "No children" or "2 children only." We couldn't find a place. At that point, we had maybe 4 children.
Yeah.
5 children. So there was a place we moved into off of Huff Avenue that we were able to get a place upstairs. And my dad, in order to get us a place, told the landlord we only had 2 kids, because that's all that was that was advertised that would be permitted. So my brother and I had a drill that when we knew the landlord was coming, we'd run down the back stairs and hide behind a parked car until he left. And one time he appeared unannounced, so we hid in a closet until he left. And, one time there was probably some noise discovered, and we were asked to leave. So, again, we lived in 21 different places.
That's crazy.
By the time I was 17, including a couple cars. So does that inform my politics? Yes. Of course, because I know what a lot of people go through.
Why isn't that, this is just perception from my limited time on this earth, why isn't that perspective more prominent in our political sphere? And I mean that in the sense, you were the OG when it came to the progressive talk. When we were kids, You're talking about things like the military-industrial complex.
Right.
You're talking about universal health care. At the time, it almost feels like you were, I don't think you're ahead of your time, but in a way, you're ahead of your time. Why isn't that perspective more prominent, do you think? Because a lot of times when we hear people representing us, they're talking something, but they don't necessarily have that reference point that you're talking about. I feel like if I'm a citizen, I want to vote for someone, and I'm not trying to be political here. This is just a conversation with anybody, whether it's Democrat, Republican. I want that person to know what it likes and to understand the connectivity of a society. I feels like we've gone away from a connect. You said someone's always already there or always there for you. That's an understanding of a connectivity.
Yeah.
I hear a lot of individuality in the sense of just be in your bubble, pull your bootstraps up, all that kind of stuff. Well, why isn't that more prominent? It feels like that's more real. I'm not even saying you're running for governor and people will make their decision,
right,
whether they listen to this show or not. But why don't, regardless of the party, we look at people and say, that's a real perspective and they have something to offer that informs policy and law and legislation?
Well, you know, one never knows the life journey that we take, what it prepares us for. I mean, when I'm sleeping in a car with my family on the edge of the industrial valley, just, you know, getting hope only from the flame of the basic oxygen furnace that's lighting up the night sky. Was I thinking that, gee, this is going to help me become a congressman someday or governor of Ohio? I wasn't thinking anything like that. We're thinking about surviving.
Right.
You're thinking about, are there any more hamburgers, you know, that remain uneaten in the sack that Dad just brought from the White Castle? You know, you're riveted to survival. But what happens is that the experience that I've had has enabled me to develop a compassion for what people go through, to understand that life has its ups and downs, that no matter how comfortable you may be, life can take a turn and go sideways, and all of a sudden everything you work for can suddenly be gone, and you can't be so sure that it can't happen to you. So because of that understanding, you know, I brought to public life, and I bring to this moment, an awareness of what people go through and a dedication to making sure that the institutions of government, you know, reflect people's real concerns. This is why, by the way, I'm such a fierce opponent of war, because it's a racket, because it gives these contractors billions of dollars. And what happens with this? Political justifications are made for killing millions of innocent people all over the world. People who are just like us trying to survive. I've been all over the world. I've met people from all over the world.
Yeah.
There's not much of a difference between people from one country to another. The world's interconnected. It's interdependent.
Yeah.
And so when we start to say people, because of their race, color, creed, are so different, that's a lie. We're connected. The human genome theory says we're 99% made of the same stuff.
Right.
So what's war about, really? What is it really about? It's a racket. It puts money in the pockets of people, and it uses our young men and women as cannon fodder, and it destroys the lives of people everywhere. How do I know that? Look, I grew up in the inner city. I understand what people's basic needs are. They're not interested in killing other people. They're just trying to survive, and that's the same thing all over the world. So what America's about, I'll tell you, I don't buy it. This idea that we ought to be have 800 bases in 130 countries. What is that about?
It's a strange thing.
Why don't we bring our resources back here? America spent $6 trillion since 9/11 on primarily war. What is that about? That's why, you know, I gave hundreds of speeches in Congress condemning this condition where we're going to war based on lies on one hand, and the other hand, we're killing innocent people, and we're doing this in the name of safety and security. Baloney.
Why do they make those decisions? And I say they generally. You know, we have $1 trillion in student loan debt in this country, and people are suffering, right? So why is there a willingness in Washington to spend trillions and trillions of dollars on war, but not invest? Like, I want to kind of get, like, where does that mobility of the decision making actually happen? Because when I talk to people, when I toured as a storyteller, same experience on a much smaller level than you, people are generally the same and they want the same thing. And so you go into these rooms, it always feels like the rooms we're in, the conversations we have in those rooms aren't reflected in the laws and what's happening in D.C. Is that frustrating to you? And
well, you know,
why do we make those choices? I guess is what I'm saying.
One cannot hold in one's soul or heart frustration. It is frustration has the qualities of inertia,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm out there every day trying to change the world. So am I frustrated? No.
You're not frustrated.
No, but I realize exactly what's going on. And what's going on is our country went the wrong way after World War II,
Yeah.
and we began to use our military to take over other countries, to subvert their governments on behalf of corporations who had particular interest in those countries. And we've lost our way. And then the spending becomes institutionalized. The Pentagon will spend upwards of $700 billion a year.
Yeah.
Add that into the cost of wars, over $1 trillion a year to keep these wars going.
But why that and not education? Just in your personal view,
Because war is an inconscient force that gives meaning to some people's lives. And should we instead think for a moment, if we invested $1 trillion a year in education, every young person could go to a 4-year college tuition free. You could pay for PhDs, tuition free.
And they would have money to spend on small businesses and shop locally and all that stuff,
You
right?
got it. The multiplier effect of that kind of investment would create a new society. But instead we're into war. And some people think, well, that's just the way it is. It is not the way it has to be. And that's what for 16 years in Congress.
Yeah.
Well, I came to Congress to create jobs, for health care for all, education for all, retirement security for all. I found myself in the middle of the situation where they're spending money for one war after another. We're attacking people that, for what? To take over their country? It's so stupid. And I call it for what it is.
Yeah.
And so, but it's also corrupt, because the money that's being spent that keeps the war going is killing innocent people, and it's all to gain political power, and it's some geopolitical, multidimensional chess game that's pathetic.
Well, you spoke, and you've been vocal about it during, especially the Bush administration, Bush 2, the war. You and your ocean there. I mean, you were like 23 when you held. Were you 23 years old when you held public office for the first time?
Well, I ran. First
like
time
city
I ran, I
councilman?
was 20. I was elected when I was 22.
When I was 23, I couldn't get through. I was trying to figure out like what I'm gonna have for lunch. Like like the maybe it's that reading like you said when you were a kid.
I thought about what I had for lunch.
Well, I'm talking about, but that was my
choices,
day job. Was trying to
Right,
figure out.
right.
Thank you. That was my. I mean, really thinking about that. What is it about? At that young age, why did you get into this? Did you feel like that this is the platform to?
I as a child, I understood that my life wasn't about me; that it had to be about service of some kind. I understood that from a very early age, and I really, that was like a polar star that guided me. I didn't know it would take me. You know, I had an intuition when I was 16 years old that I would be mayor of Cleveland by the time I was about 30 years old.
Did you really?
Yeah. I had no idea how that was going to happen, but I kind of understood that would happen. And, you know, I had nothing, I had no real knowledge of how to get there. But I had this knowingness that said, well, you know, you're going to be of service. I knew when I was in the 10th grade that I would be in Congress someday. How that would happen, I had no idea. But I, you know, I just had this awareness of a life that was about service, and I followed that intuition.
And then I mean you fought, man. Like from what you fought against some. You talk about corporations, you talk about the military-industrial complex, but as a mayor of Cleveland, I mean you had your life threatened. You had big industry pushing you. You stand there, right? At what point do you ever just go like, hey, this is like. Regardless of your political perspective, I really mean that because I got people from all spheres listening to this. As a person, I think for millennials, though, like speaking your truth is really important. And that's why I really wanted to talk to you, because regardless of politics, you speak your truth. How do you face those opponents, even as a mayor, and now you're running for governor? I want to get into that before you have to jet out. Where does that courage come from to stand up? Regardless of what people like it or not, where does that come from? Because you face some serious, like, opponents.
Well, you know, when you grow up in inner city, you learn the street. And when you overcome the fear of the street, you're not afraid of anyone. But, you know, it was Ralph Waldo Emerson, whose essay on self-reliance I read from the time I was, 10, 11 years old. he wrote in this essay something that every young person should read and be aware of. He wrote, above all, to thine own self be true. Every heart vibrates to that iron string. To believe what's true for you could be true for everyone. So I followed that truth, and what I found out is that there were people who would agree with me. But I didn't do that to seek agreement. I found that out coincidentally.
Yeah.
And one must take heart. You know, heart's where the French word for heart is coeur. It's the root of the word courage. Courage is connected to heart. We have to find what it is in our own hearts that moves us to where our passions are, and never be afraid to take a stand. And so it becomes a practice. Was I born this way? No. But I developed that way by stepping forth when others wouldn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that I didn't feel any trepidation.
Yeah.
Of course I did. But after a while, courage becomes a practice. And then you integrate that into everything you do, into who you are. So by the time I became mayor, when these interest groups were trying to force me to sell Cleveland's municipal electric system or any number of deals that they had, those who were trying to threaten me, they were dealing with the wrong guy. Because I cannot be threatened. I cannot be intimidated. No one can, I'm not afraid of anyone. And, I've seen, when you face death, as I did medically a couple times. Yeah. When someone takes a shot that just misses your head, take a shot with a high-powered rifle, it just misses your head. You become not really fatalistic, but you become aware that the purpose of your life remains unfulfilled, and so you stay at it. So I don't, it's like, though I walk through the valley of shadows, I shall fear no evil.
There's a fight you and your running mate Tara Samples are fighting now in Ohio. I think it just, what did they pass the referendum in Akron for the assault rifles?
Right, resolution.
What is going on with this?
Well,
what's going on with these rifles? This is insane.
Look,
to
we
me.
have 8 million assault rifles in America. 8 million. So how did this happen? Well, the NRA is like the marketing agency of the arms industry. So they turn it into like a Second Amendment thing. So everybody goes, oh, the Second Amendment. Well, actually, federal courts have ruled that weapons of war are not protected under the Second Amendment. Right. That was the Virginia Court of Appeals a year ago ruled that, okay? And 5 states now have assault weapons ban. We want an assault weapons ban in Ohio. But let me tell you what happened. Most people aren't aware of this. And it relates to this governor's race. In 1991, the city of Cleveland had an assault weapons ban in 91. 19 years later, a new attorney general was elected in Ohio. He was a Democrat. And at the behest of the NRA, he targeted that assault weapons ban, took it to the Ohio Supreme Court, and made the argument and got it overturned. So Cleveland's assault weapon ban, and every other community in Ohio, they couldn't have an assault weapons ban. He did this at the behest of the NRA. Then, not content with that, he went to federal court on behalf of the NRA in a case called NRA versus Chicago, also McDonald versus Chicago, which resulted in just about every single law that every community in the country passed being overturned. And he did this on behalf of the NRA again, got an A rating, said that he was one of the most important representatives of the rights of gun owners, and people then were left with no ability at a local level to pass any laws that would restrict these kinds of guns. So this person is one of my opponents in this race. His name is Richard Cordray. I didn't come on your show to knock him around, but I have to tell you, some serious questions have to be asked of this individual. Yeah. Like, what's going on with the NRA? If someone wants to have a gun, that's their business. The Supreme Court has established a personal right to own a firearm. Yeah. But assault weapons are weapons of war.
That's a different story.
Hello. And what's next? Personal nuclear devices? We have to ask ourselves, how do we protect society? How do we protect these kids in schools? Why should children have to worry about somebody coming into their classroom and spraying them with with automatic weapons fire and killing the whole class. Why should a teacher have to worry that he's going to have to take a bullet for their kids if somebody enters a classroom? This is crazy. It's madness.
Well, the NRA's narrative, it seems, is that and it's funny when you listen to all the rebuttals, whether it's a spokesperson, they're always talking about the narrative of they're taking your guns away. Any sort of reform, whether it's a national level or a state level, they're pulling them away. No one, even as a small step, no one's pulling guns away. Am I right? I mean, maybe no one wants to take them away. We're just saying, don't you have a pistol, have a musket, bro. Have a musket.
Right.
But to have an assault weapon.
Well, it's a weapon of war.
That's
insane.
It's used what do you need it for?
It's used to kill people. It's not used to hunt rabbits.
Right. And if you were using it to hunt rabbits, you got a serious problem. That's like.
Well, wait.
It's insane to do that.
People have to realize what's at stake in this governor's race. Now, Tara Samples and I have been very clear. We will push for an assault weapons ban. But when you've got somebody who believes that there's a God-given right to have an assault weapon, that natural law is connected to it, what? I mean, there's like a craziness that's attached to this. Mr. Cordray, not a bad guy, really, but on guns, like really over the top. When he was Attorney General, there was a group that came to him and said they wanted permission to have a rally on the State House grounds with guns. They wanted an armed rally on State House grounds. He intervened to make sure that they got permission to do that, and even said that they wouldn't have to get an insurance policy against to do this. There's a level of genuflection to the NRA, which is inappropriate.
To me, it's just this nature of lobbying and having influence. Feels like it's like business.
Yeah, I mean, but that's how state government works. And the thing about me is, I'm not for sale. No one has a string on me. I can make the decisions in the interests of the people, and no lobby group can tap me on the shoulder or say, "Hey, we need you to do this right now."
Yeah,
doesn't happen. That's not the way I work. But some people do, and that's kind of the time-honored tradition in Columbus. They work through lobbyists.
Yeah,
I don't.
I got about 2 more questions for you because you have only a couple more minutes. One, you've taken different kinds of criticism on different sides when you were contributing at Fox News. You have your thoughts on Donald Trump. You hear what he's saying about assault weapons. Can you, as best you can, where do you see where we're at in a Trump administration now on a national level? And what is going to be the difference? And I know it's a different process, but what is going to be the difference, and how are you going to approach your governorship in a different way?
Well, the one thing, as a result of being on Fox, I never changed my message that I had on the floor of the House of Representatives. But I felt that that one must not preach only to the choir, that we have to be able to engage people with whom we disagree.
Agreed.
How do you
solve problems?
How do you solve problems? How do you change people's minds if you don't talk to them?
Right. It's like an echo chamber.
Thank you. When I was given the opportunity to be on Fox, I jumped at it because it was a chance to reach out to that audience.
Yeah.
And what they learned about me is that I'm level-headed. I'll talk to people. I don't condemn people because of their political party or their ideology.
Yeah.
But I want to go beyond that. I want to get to deeper truths about who we are as a country. And one of the things I think, as a result of that, and also as a result of the way I look at life, I can work with anyone no matter what their political party. I don't care what political party anyone belongs to. And none of us should. We should focus on what we want to achieve. I'd like to see everyone in Ohio have health care. I'd like to see every young person have at least 2 years of college tuition free. I'd like to find a mechanism to pay off some of the debt that people are strapped with, student debt. I'd like to make sure that we end fracking and deep injection wells so we protect our water, okay? Yeah. I want a ban on assault weapons. Well, these are all things that you have to reach out to people. You can't do it on your own. And so I keep open to make that happen. And that's one of the reasons why, by the way, I'm probably the only Democrat in this race who can appeal to Trump voters. The people who went to Donald Trump knew the Democratic Party sold him out. They knew the Democratic Party sold him out on trade, on wars, and never delivered what was promised.
So you think you can flip that demographic?
I can certainly talk to them in a way that no Democrat can. And when you can talk to people, there's a chance that you can bring them your way.
Yeah.
And so, I have serious disagreements with President Trump on his immigration policies, on continuing the wars that he promised he'd end, on trying to privatize the infrastructure instead of helping states fund programs without privatization.
What about arming teachers? He mentioned that.
I mentioned that in my remark. I mean, the idea of arming teachers. Look, there's too many guns already. You make a school a shooting gallery. A teacher feels threatened, she has to shoot one of her students. This is insane.
Right.
And so we have to recalibrate what government's about. And the difficulty that President Trump has is he went into the White House without any political experience whatsoever. And that's a problem. This idea that you can just walk in to the highest office in the land without having any political experience, that's very difficult because you can't see around the corner.
Yeah.
And so he's flying in the blind often on these things. And it's not just about using Twitter and other things to try to move an audience. On the other hand, what I don't do, I do not engage in personal attacks. Because to me, that goes nowhere. Every one of us has to retain the ability to reach out to people without tearing them to pieces. Now, what's on the record is one thing, but to try to suggest that someone's beneath the grace of God, no matter what their politics are, you got to be careful with that.
Yeah.
So, and because those who voted for Trump a number of them still identify with him. When you attack him, you basically tell them that you don't want to talk to them either. You got to be careful. So I have a lot of experience. Actually, when I think about it, it's almost hard for me to actually, realize this. But I started my career 51 years ago.
You've been at it for a minute.
And it's funny you said that because I feel like every day is the first day of school too.
Yeah. Well, and the last question, you mentioned conversation is so important. That's why I'm doing this. I mean, and there's a lot of podcasts. There's a lot of conversations happening. There's also a lot of noise that is in the echo chambers and that it has negativity. Right. And I'm sure that if we had another episode or 3 episodes, we would find things that we disagree with. I'm sure on the surface, everyone does. But the fact that we can sit down and have a discourse, a civil discourse, a conversation, I think is the most important, and connect. Like we were talking about, this podcast is really about like hearing things about you, your passion, who you are as a person, like things that people wouldn't know. Conversation is important. So I have one last question for you. And I know you've had a lot of them, 51 years worth, and then obviously years before that. What is the conversation, name a conversation that changed your life, that shifted, that you could have had it with a loved one, a parent, or whoever, something that just maybe shifted the framework of how you looked at the world, influenced you? It could be good, it could be bad. Can you remember an example that just shifted you?
I can remember lots of them, but I'll take you back to the 6th grade at St. Aloysius School and Church, located at 110th and St. Clair Avenue in Cleveland. And Sister Leona was the principal and also our 6th grade teacher. And there's a lot of stories that I have connected with her, but one that really had an impact was that she instructed the class, all of us, to pick up a book and read as she stepped out of the classroom for a few minutes. When she came back, the room was in an uproar. And she was very displeased, to say the least, and just the look on her face froze everybody in the room. And then she said, "Children, I want you to take out a piece of paper and a pencil. I'm going to write something on the board, and I want you to copy it." So she wrote this poem on the board. And then afterwards, she said, "Children, you're to go home tonight and copy this poem 50 times. And the groan from the class went up, and people were writing the poem down. And this moment was indelibly inscribed on my soul, because here was that poem, the minute. I have only just 1 minute, only 60 seconds in it. forced upon me, can't refuse it, didn't seek it, didn't choose it, but it's up to me to use it. Give account if I abuse it. Heaven help me if I lose it. Just one tiny little minute. But eternity is in it. I was 12 years old when I wrote that down on a piece of paper. And Sister Leona remains with me every day. And that lesson, I took that lesson into so many moments in life, that this moment matters. And it's made a big difference.
This made a big difference. It mattered to me. Thank you for talking with me.
Thank you.
I appreciate you.